Hey everybody, my name's Tyler. I'm from Uneeq. We are using game engine technology in the business-to-business space. So if you're here and you're a strategic thinker for a big brand, a big company, I saw Samsung on the list, I saw some other big businesses selling stuff. We actually use game engine tech to solve a business-to-consumer problem. So we're not actually a developer, we're not a studio, but we use Gen AI all the time. We're an AWS shop. We are an NVIDIA top-level partner, I forget the name of it. And the way that every customer thinks about what we do when we create a face for a model is it going to be the next Microsoft Tay? Excuse me, Microsoft, I'm sorry. But if you remember that, it was a very radical experiment that went off the rails and was quickly shut down. And so they talked to us about guardrails. How do you make sure it's safe? And so one of the techniques that we piloted for safe AI was to bring the firewall analogy in. You know, there are some things that don't need to reach models. Not everything needs to go to an LLM. So that has been the thinking for the past few years. Let's just make bigger and better and more performant models. But some things are already solved. We don't want profanity to appear. And there's only so many words and there's only so many ways to spell them. Let's just filter it out, right? It gets more nuanced, as I'm sure my friend will talk about. But there are a lot of things that you can do to keep your model safe that involve changing the model. Just think about it that way, right? So that's a little bit from me. When I turn it over, you can answer the question about guardrails.
Awesome. Hey, everybody, I'm Carter. I'm the CTO, one of the co-founders of Modulate. Thank you. Thank you very much. One of the CTO and one of the co-founders of Modulate. We do voice moderation capabilities, primarily proactive voice moderation. So you have a game, you have voice chat. That means you have a voice chat community. That means you have a voice chat code of conduct, either an explicit one or implicitly whatever the players trend towards. It is a good idea to prevent your players from harassing each other and driving people out of your community, and we make that possible. So you send all of your voice chat through us. We triage out 99.9% of those conversations that are totally benign, and we take that 0.1% of those conversations that are actual violations of your code of conduct, and we escalate them over to you. And you do something about them, be it send a warning, mute that player, et cetera, et cetera. And then, in addition, as your players are reporting each other for suspected bad behavior, we can go correlate that with the audio that we're keeping in our databases that we're already collecting proactively and say, yeah, okay, hold on, that report was justified. We actually saw this behavior here. You can do something about it. Or, hey, this player reported someone for voice chat toxicity, and actually that person never spoke. So, you know, that's a false report. Maybe they're trying to report bomb somebody, et cetera, et cetera. So what's going on today, to get to that, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year question, I'm going to focus on 1 year because things are moving really fast. I can maybe see a year in advance, right? What's happening today is people are deploying AI capabilities like Modulate to make their communities safer, reduce harassment, reduce toxicity, reduce some of the even more severe harms, things like child grooming, et cetera, which does happen in games. And they are seeing benefits to their community in terms of retention increases, including new players or players returning back to your game. If you're doing proactive moderation, you see 10 to 15% lift in that retention, which is huge. People actually want to be part of safer and better protected communities where your code of conduct is actually enforced. Where is that going in the next year? Not only are you removing bad behavior from your voice chat communities and from your communities at large, but you're also encouraging positive behavior too, right? And AI capabilities are powering your tool set to understand, hey, these players are supporting each other. Hey, this player is seeing some toxicity and helping them counter it, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're going to have tools to let you build up the kind of community you want and encourage the kind of behavior that you want to be there and reduce the behavior that you don't. And finally, better understanding of what people are talking about in those voice chat communities. If they're upset, why are they upset? If they love something, why do they love something? If you've made a tie-in, do they like it? What do they want next? What not? All in privacy-preserving, statistically kind of collected in significant ways. So there's a lot that can be done with voice data and data at large in games. You can derive a lot of insights and make a lot of good impact. That's going to be happening in the next 12 months. Get excited.
Cool. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm Marie. I'm the head of sales at Scenario. At Scenario, we're building the most complete AI toolbox for the gaming industry. That means that we enable studios to train their own custom AI models to generate style-consistent assets. So how do we see the future, and actually what is the vision of Scenario? The vision of Scenario is to say that every single pixel in games are going to be generated by AI. So imagine just a game where you have a player, a AAA MMO, for example, where you have different guilds, and those different guilds need to basically see that the world is reflecting what the guild is building. Well, Scenario is being able to build that. So how are we making life a lot easier? Obviously, training the models on Scenario today is only 5 to 10 images, and you can actually achieve amazing results by doing so. So those models, you plug them in games, and then you generate style-consistent assets. Doing that at scale enables us to facilitate the fact that studios can only focus on building games and not so much on like the hassle of like tech, scaling GPUs, and basically like, not being able to manage the cost as well. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jake Hawley. I'm the Chief Gaming Officer for Endava Games, formerly TLM Partners. 1, 5, 10, it's easy for me to sort of look at the one-year horizon. I think a lot of our clients right now are having us actually sign agreements that say we will not put Gen AI. Endava does professional services across multiple sectors. Obviously, I'm head of the gaming side. So a number of our publishing partners have said, do not put Gen AI at all into any of our games. And they're really trying to get a good beat on what's going on in the industry. And very specifically, litigation, copyright infringement, unauthorized usage, that type of thing. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, a lot of that starts getting resolved. So as court cases go through, as legislation comes through, as it becomes more clear that it's safe, I think there's a whole lot of fear associated with using Gen AI right now. As it becomes more clear to the larger publishers that it is actually safe to start using some of these newer technologies for prop objects, for testing QA, for moderation and whatnot, it will become easier to adapt, and it will really change fundamentally the way that a lot of game development is done. A lot of the rote tasks that are being done today by human beings can be automated and can be left to a computer to go and think about. Does this replace human beings? No, but it definitely changes the paradigm associated with the work models. So think 1995 as Mosaic released a browser and what that did for visual computing and the ability to consume a lot of information very rapidly, or the Ford Corporation automating the factory floor and really changing the way that automobiles were constructed. So, I mean, I think it really comes down to the ability to automate and to drive a higher level of engagement with the actual users of the technology, to then leverage that to do multiples of the ability to produce content on just a massive scale.
Awesome, thank you. So, fantastic visions. Can you talk a little bit about the real challenges that your customers face and what you're doing to solve them? And just to add a little bit to the question, each of you represents a fairly narrow use case in the AI field, which is large. But because of that focus, you've been really able to drill into like the real meat of what makes that use case tick. And I'd love to hear what impediments you found and how you've solved them and what you continue to see.
So where we are seeing the most traction is on learning. So we're seeing tremendous opportunities to go and catalog and present to our engineering teams. As a for example, we've scanned all of UDN and thrown it into Chatbot 3.5 and 4.0, and we're doing comparative analysis to see which is doing a better job of analyzing and bringing back useful responses to the questions that are happening. We're now starting to see even the clients that have said, you may not use generated content in any of our games, but hey, that tool was really cool. How did you do that? And can we, either use it, license it, whatever? So, again, I think it goes to productivity. Where we're seeing real interesting gains is around productivity. Our QA guys love the ability to run through it, on the soak tests and whatnot, the ability to actually go and cover an entire map in 15 minutes for, the entirety of, 12, 14, 16 hours worth of gameplay. Those are some of where we're seeing it. So really productivity is where we're seeing some of the biggest advancements. But again, it's a whole lot of caution. When we present this to clients, they really want to know, are there guardrails? Is there a firewall? How do we make sure none of what you're doing makes it into any of our consumer-facing games? So.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, at Scenario, we are seeing some of the challenges as well that you're having at Endava. One of the first one being is like, how do I actually talk to my team, and how do I make sure that I'm augmenting them? So actually providing tools such as like the suite that we're providing at Scenario is enabling and tackling them to basically focus where they could accelerate their production. And that's some of the things that we're seeing with the customers that we're having. So for example, Innovate Games is one of our mobile game customers. You might know them. They were able to accelerate the production by 20% and actually relocate 2 of their artists to other games. So they didn't actually do any layoffs. They just basically allocated the artists to focus on other games. Another impediment that we're observing is of course, security. That is one of the top ones that we're observing. So at Scenario, we actually private by default. So that means that when you are training your models, nothing is leaving the workspace or the API that you're working in. We also don't do any learning on top of your data, which is crucially important when you are working with IPs. You don't want your main character to be basically like found in like someone else's, game, literally. And you don't want like to spend so many hours and so many months developing the IPs, basically getting spoiled and put down the trash. The other issue as well that we are seeing is like, actually, how do we see where the data is coming from? So actually building pipelines where you can have the whole full data traceability of actually seeing like, hey, this person has prompted this person has put this image as a reference, really enables you to kind of like see, okay, I can put this asset in production or not. So this is how we're solving those kind of issues at Scenario.
Awesome, fantastic. There are a lot of different issues in the topic of moderation that you have to be really cognizant of. And ultimately, moderation and community management and community growth in general is about affecting the real life, day-to-day experience of your customers in this space that you've built. You have a really serious responsibility to these people, right? They're trusting you with their time. They're investing time, money, they're bringing their friends into these experiences, and you kind of have an obligation to make that experience something that's welcoming and safe for them. And if you mess that up, like, you're ruining their day when they trusted you, right? Gamers lose trust really, really easily. And so you talk about things like, let's say you say, okay, let me pick a racial slur, and that, that's racial harassment. That's not allowed here. Well, you might think that, right? You might believe that, hey, like, that's harassment, that's not allowed here. There might be people in a different community that use that term in an empowering or reclaimed way, right? Maybe you don't even know about that, but maybe there's a group of people that comes on into your game and they start using this terminology in a way that they feel is totally fine. Nobody's being harmed, nobody's being harassed. But if you have a system that picks that up and says, hey, you're banned from our game for harassment or something like that, those players are never coming back because you didn't generalize appropriately across a wide variety of contexts, some of which you didn't understand as a developer. And so one of the biggest challenges that we see, especially when you start using AI tools to help automate some of your community management and moderation capabilities, is are you generalizing enough? Generalizing across different, like, even just different game types in your game. Like, people have different lingo. People have different ways of talking about your game. There are different items, right? Like, maybe somebody says something about, like, going and invading a base in one game and it totally makes sense. And then in a different game, like, that's totally, like, completely out there. It doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's inappropriate, right? That kind of thing. Gamers have very specific lingo, and that evolves extremely quickly. And it's different based on different demographics. And then you bring in the fact that you have a global player base and people are speaking different languages. That is a huge problem. And the way to solve that appropriately is that as you're deploying these systems, testing these systems, building these systems, you have to have real human review of that content and eyes on that training data that you're using to build these systems that understand all of these different contexts. It's not enough to just have a team of 3 people labeling some data for you and hoping it generalizes to every single culture on this planet. You have to have a really, really broad reach in training, understanding, and supervising these AI systems that you're deploying. If you don't, you're going to hurt someone unintentionally, and they're never going to come back. So you have to get it right the first time.
We solve a bit of a different problem. Searching and matching. Searching is, I know what I'm looking for. I type in the words that make sense to me. But matching is, I want an experience. I don't exactly know how to characterize it. So I want to talk to somebody about it and describe the experience for me. A great example of a company that matches very well is Airbnb. You tell it what kind of vacation you want, and they show you properties that will give that to you. When companies have large catalogs of products or services, and people don't know exactly how to search for what they want, they end up in a scenario where they don't have confidence, they haven't built trust, and they don't buy. And we see that with a lot of large corporations. If you have t-shirt sizes of a product or a service, more often than not, you will get a lot of quantity purchasing in the M or the S, because people don't know how to qualify themselves into the larger package. This is very common for telecommunications. One of our customers, small, medium, large data plans, people would buy consistently the M size or the S size with their .com. They put a digital human on their website with the same information, and people started qualifying themselves into the larger plan. 5 times greater conversions, higher ARPU per transaction, and a greater CSAT score of the process, because there was somebody to ask. So the large language models represent the ability to create communication via text, but there's written to be read and there's written to be said. And if any of you ever did theater or something, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There is a performance in how we communicate that is not encapsulated purely in 26 letters of our English language alphabet, which is why we have emojis, which is why we have stage direction, which is why we need inputs from lighting and things like that. And Jensen Huang, in his keynote, said digital humans twice, which is what our company domain has been for the past 5-6 years. So we have been in this space of, it's more than just a brain. It needs a face. It needs an identity. It needs to have the personification so that we can connect to it and build trust and affirm the things that we want to do. So if we are going to solve the business problem of allowing customers to engage with automation, they have to be confident that they can do it by themselves. And the digital human gives them a human adjacent experience. Not as good as a person. We're not trying to say it can replace people, but sometimes people aren't available. And somebody still wants that affirmation. So that's the problem we solve, right? And just to bring the gaming engine into it, we did it by creating a model of synthetic animation that we call Synonym that autonomously drives the locomotion and the emotion of the metahuman characters that come out of Unreal. So it's taking those things that work in games and actually bringing them into a business application that solves a real problem, which is emotional. It's not about the capabilities of language or information or knowledge. It's about connecting and having somebody look me in the eyes and say, yeah, that's a good idea. You should buy that one. And people go, I thought so. And they buy. That's what they need. Not a better, larger, more performant model, but just something that approximates that intangible, nonverbal that they're looking for.
So I think it brings up a really interesting point when you talked about making that emotional connection from these digital humans, because it's tough to make an emotional connection with a form or a marketplace page, right? It's just like, hey, it's kind of, I mean, I guess I've had emotional reactions to web pages before, but like, it's tough to build the one that you want. But with Gen AI and these capabilities to deploy something where you are interacting like you're interacting with a human, I think that also brings some of the risks that people talk about with respect to generative AI too, of like, hey, okay, my customers are going to have, or my players are going to have an emotional reaction to this system that I built. And in order for it to emotionally like connect with them, there has to be a lot of depth, a lot of nuance. We've got to be deploying these powerful models. And hopefully they stay on script, but it's very reasonable to have a fear that they might not. And I think there's two pieces to allaying that fear that the industry is like figuring out now. One is doing it right from the start, building in guardrails from the start, building in tools from the start so that you don't have to constantly be changing or tweaking or updating your models. You have to kind of like set it up correctly the first time, validate correctly the first time, and have the right tools so that, when you're deploying a synthetic animation that's being controlled by some generative AI system, it's not going to just do rude gestures at people, right? You built it so that that's kind of not an option. That being said, we are at GDC. Gamers are creative. They're really creative in getting systems to do things that you didn't intend them to do, and they're also really creative at getting systems to do rude things that go viral. And so I think there's a kind of like monitoring and understanding component of what are players actually doing to interact with these systems live, and trying to see like, hey. You can't just like get a bunch of little analytics like blips back to your sort of data warehouse to try to see, oh, hey, was my generative AI rude? Like that's a real like human kind of thing that this model is doing. And it's not telling you, hey, I'm going to be rude. It's just emergent. So you have to have monitoring systems on top of that can see these interactions, understand these interactions, and tell you what's going on, right? Like, I do a moderation company, so like you kind of have to moderate your AIs too, because otherwise they'll go off the rails in ways that you don't expect, especially with gamers.
Oh, well, let's ask the next question.
So we've got about 5 minutes. I think to touch on something. So you brought up interesting points that kind of come into play at, I would say, different points in game development, right? Like you mentioned setting this stuff up early. Scenario, you're working with folks, I imagine, at all kind of like levels and tiers of development. And I'm sure our audience here has games that are about to ship and games that are very pre-concept. Does anybody want to touch on like when is the right time to bring this in to make it easiest for your respective solutions? And also, like, how do you build your game knowing that you now have these new capabilities? Like, what doors does that open for games should even be?
So I think when you are developing a game, you obviously go through different stages. And I think today you have a panel of AI tools that you can actually integrate. So again, from production, you can use like tools to like quickly conceptualize some ideas and be like, hey, actually like, exploring new styles, exploring like new concepts as well. But you can also be like, okay, you know what? We've shipped a game, but we need to localize our sets as well. We need to like, make it shipping to, I don't know, Asia, for example. So actually using generative AI to do that could be a really good use case. Or just like being like, okay, we need to do some A/B testing on like application images as well. How can we generate fast as well those images to basically see what's working the best? So how do you approach it to the team? I think it's very important to like just bring the right message and be like, hey, actually like these AI tools are available. Well, luckily enough, there are like, platforms such as Scenario, which groups them all. But there's also other ones. So really encourage teams to like explore, really encourage teams to be like innovative as well. I think that would really empower them to go out and actually test. So yeah, is there a good time? Yeah, the good time is now.
Yeah, I would absolutely mirror what you're saying. I mean, we recently did a prototype for a company that's out trying to sell their game. And from the onset, they had a plan for AI. From the onset, they knew how they wanted to use it. That's not necessarily the case with all of the partners that we're working with. And so I would say, absolutely, from the onset, you want to be coming up with your plan. In pre-production, you want to have an idea of how am I going to use this? Where am I going to use this? When am I going to use this? And then go and start executing on that. And prototype. Very much go and see what it is. You can use it from pre-production all the way to final. We use it for image rec. To your point, it's not just good enough to have the AI go and say, hey, this is potentially offensive. You need to have human eyes on that to actually go and see it and qualify it and determine how good is my AI actually finding something. Well, you thought that was, some sort of, a swastika as a, for example, good example. But no, it's actually, an Indian ruin, and it just happens to be inverted. And so you got a false positive on that one, right? So it really is, the capabilities are there, but it's gonna come with human beings really trying to tune the models, and really validate what is being seen, shown, and flagged. So,
I think learning and development's a really interesting application of our technology. Imagine you have a sales force, right? I mean, let's take Call of Duty, right? You spend $100 million building the game and $50 million marketing the game, whatever it was. You have to train an enormous amount of people to the value proposition of what you're doing. Who better than to communicate the value of the game than a character from the game? So you should sit down with the main shooter guy, whatever his name was in Call of Duty, and he can tell you about the game, what you're going to do, what you're going to experience, and you can have a conversation. Every single one of your salespeople, every single one of your marketing people that didn't work on building the game, people that maybe played it once for 10 minutes, and now their job is to go out and sell 50 million copies of this thing. They need more than a PowerPoint or a video. What we do with our game engine technology is make that character real-time conversational. So you can just have a web browser, a character from your game, and it can pitch you, then you can ask questions, and it is your original influencer, right? That's what people on TikTok are doing, and they're making money, is promoting your titles and selling more copies. So you guys are okay with it because they're influencing the market. Well, have your characters do that for you. They're the best spokespeople of your property, right? So that's really what we do with our technology, is enable real-time generative conversation so that you can actually get more value out of your investment. You put a lot of money into making these things. Let them speak for themselves.
Sure, absolutely. I'll round it out. So talking about when should you invest in these tools, at least in my space, in kind of the community management space, you should do it before you have a community. It might not have to be years before you ship, right? It can be months before you ship. But the most important time for you to be shaping a healthy community that's going to welcome players and grow is when that community jumps into your game for the first time and starts interacting. That's when the reputation of your game is going to be formed. That's when the community behaviors are going to be formed. That's when all the memes, that's when all the phrases, that's when the default behaviors are going to be formed. And people are going to see whether your game is a place where they can bring their friends, where they can hang out, their third space, or whether it's going to be kind of a sweat fest where people are super toxic and they try to get out of there as fast as possible. And so if you miss that critical window when new players are experiencing and learning about your community over time, they're going to form an opinion, and then you have to go correct it. It can be done. It absolutely can be done, and you can see very positive impact, even implementing safe community practices after you have shipped. But it is so much better to start from a good position and build a healthy community right from the start. So before people start playing your game.
Did you want to say something, Marie?
I want to say one last thing. So, obviously with this panel here, we're seeing that the market has never seen so many AI tools. So this is possible because of such as NVIDIA, because of partners such as AWS as well, that make it extremely accessible as well. And it's really important for studios today to really partner up with people such as Uneeq, Modulate, Endava, AWS Scenario as well, to really develop a competitive edge, because you can literally fine-tune, use those tools to make it really fit your business model. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for your time. Thank you all.